Well, and the beautiful thing about that is now you're not limited to one VA because he can replicate that job multiple times, right? You can have 10 VAs doing that job because the process is
Yeah,
already documented. You cannot
because
scale if you
that's an
don't have a
interesting
process.
that's an interesting point because
Welcome to Clicks and Bricks podcast. We talk about the entrepreneur mindset, everything from that Main Street brick and mortar to that billion-dollar manufacturer. Be sure to head over to clicksandbricksacademy.com so you can access all the resources to start improving your sales today.
Welcome back to Clicks and Bricks. My name is Ken. Today I have David with us. He exited a Fortune 100 company to chase his passion on helping small businesses deploy processes inside of their business. Before we bring David on, though, if you'd like to join my text line community, the number is 314-370-2871. How are you doing today, David?
I'm fine. I'm calling you from Bristol in England.
Thank you very much for taking the time. It is about, I think it's 2 o'clock in Central Time in the U.S. What time is it for you?
About 9 o'clock in the evening.
9 in the evening. Thank you for joining us after dinner. We definitely appreciate your time here today.
Not at all. Not at all.
Can you tell the audience a little bit about what you do and what your business is?
Okay. Well, technically what I do is called process digitalization. Notice the AL in the middle. A lot of people will think what I do is workflow automation. Now, workflow automation is when you get a computer to get all the information and the computer just does the job. What I do is I work with people, but it's the interactions between them, the processes that I automate, not the people. So I get the right work to the right person at the right time. And that's to make their life easier.
All right. As we know, if you are in business, the biggest time waste is when a project's sitting between people and waiting for somebody to do work. That's where generally your bottlenecks tend to happen. Can you give us a little more detail about what it is specifically and how you do that?
Yeah. Okay. If you do something once, it's a project. If you do it regularly, it's a process. If it's a process, then I can automate that process to make it run more smoothly. And the way that I do this is that I work with people I call change agents. I'm looking to recruit change agents. And change agents is somebody who goes into a company and asks them what they do. And typically, you ask the first person, and they'll put it on the whiteboard, and they say, "We do this." And you ask the next person, and they say, "And then we do this." And you ask the third person, "Then we do this." And it gets the fourth person. The fourth person says, "Nah, we don't do this, we do this." At that point, a strong discussion ensues when you realize that even the small companies, everybody has an idea of what they're supposed to do, but nobody is actually certain, and that they rely on people to do stuff. And I come across a lot of small businesses where people work in the business rather than on their business. They put a lot of effort in, and if only they got themselves organized, it would make their life a lot easier.
Absolutely. I see that problem all the time, and it's a trap that I find myself falling into as a business owner, not as regularly as it used to be. In my maturity, I'm learning a little bit more to let the people that I hire to do the jobs instead of me jumping in. But this is a pretty significant problem that, Fortune 100 and 500s have these, really intricate systems to help them with their processes that small and medium-sized businesses don't have. Which brings you to the point, you exited a really good job at a Fortune 100 company to start this business. Can you tell the audience a little bit about that transition from, the comfort of a corporate job with insurance and all that stuff and leaving that comfortability and going in and jumping into your own business and taking on all that risk by yourself?
Yeah, well, I work with a colleague, and we were putting processes into large companies, and we were finding that we wanted a tool that would do certain things. On our website, there's a little white paper. I won't bore you with the detail, but it starts out 4 pages of things that we wanted a process system to be able to do. And we looked at the marketplace, and we found systems like Kanban boards and things which help you do part of the job, but doesn't do the full job. Goes straight to the punchline. The punchline is we couldn't find one, so we made it ourselves. And so what we have is a system which is totally flexible. And one of the problems I have in terms of conveying what we can do is that we can work in any marketplace. It's a matter of that any market or any business requires you to capture the process. And so what we do is we capture the process, and then we have a system for implementing it. But a lot of small businesses, I don't know where you found this, Ken, a lot of small companies don't use processes. Have you found that?
Yeah, my experience has been in small businesses and even medium-sized businesses that they think that there's an art behind what they're doing, so they don't want to overly document it, right? And typically, in my experience, there's some outliner person in the company that holds a lot of tribal knowledge that doesn't tend to share that knowledge with everybody else. And, I think we've all got a Johnny in our company that who does X, Y, and Z? Oh, Johnny does that. Well, where's it documented? Oh, we don't know. Johnny does that. So you got to go talk to Johnny, right? And I find that on a repeated basis, right? And then it's really hard battle to get out of, right? Because you got to extract all that information from the one employee and then get it documented and then train everybody else on how Johnny's been doing it, assuming Johnny's been doing it correctly.
And he wants to cooperate.
And he wants to
cooperate.
cooperate.
Want to make himself redundant.
Yes.
But it gets even worse, because sometimes it seems a role that you give to the most junior person to follow people around and note what they do and somehow come out with the process. So we have a different approach. We work with a team of people that we call change agents. And typically those people today, they go into companies to help them organize. But instead of helping them organize, we're giving them a tool set to be able to implement the process as well. So a small company doesn't think it has the knowledge to implement a process, doesn't matter. They come to one of our change agents. The change agent will sit down with them and work through and capture exactly what they do and create what I call a process map. And we do this with a very powerful tool called SCORE. And having captured it, my company can take the SCORE diagram and very quickly, in a matter of a day or two, reproduce not a simulation of the process, but the actual process itself, with all the documents and all the interactions all there. And that's what we do, basically. But typically, at that point where we go back to the client with the operational system and they actually see it for real, the normal reaction is, well, actually, when we told you, David, to do this, we actually meant do that, because it isn't what they want. It's not a problem. Our change agents sit down with them, they correct their drawing, and then we implement it. And the beautiful thing about this, we have something in the UK, it might be in America as well, ISO 9000. It's what you've got to state what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And so you've got a capture process that documents the process, and then exactly an implementation in my company's tools, which implements it.
Yeah. In the United States, I think ISO 9000 is a manufacturing standard. I operate data centers, and we have something called the SSAE 18. It might be 19, I'm not sure. We just finished but that's more of an audit that says somebody comes in and looks at every single process and verifies that we're doing the processes the way that we have them documented, right? So they audit that whole thing. It is extremely exhausting process to go through. But it's very worth it. It makes sure that there's a third party looking at your process to making sure that they're all in line. And this is simple stuff like all the way down to how much insurance you have, right? If you don't have a standardized process for how you do a risk assessment on your insurance annually, then at the end of the day, you're just making a guess, right? And if you're never looking to exit your company, you just have your company because it's a full-time job for you, I guess that's fine. But if you're looking to have a company that you run that's profitable without you existing in it every single day, you've got to get these processes in line. Yeah,
well, I give you, that's a very good point you made there, because one of the things, I go into a company and I see the owner and I say, I'm here to replace you. That doesn't always go down too well.
No.
But the thing is, when you come to sell a company, and I've talked to a guy, he's got a plumbing business, it turns over £2-3 million a year. He's looking to sell it, and he was only offered £100,000 for it. And he was shocked, because he'd hoped to retire on the sales. And I had to explain to him, he said, think about this. Your business is like a cartwheel on its side, and there's a hub to the middle of the cartwheel. That's you. If you leave the business, your whole business is going to collapse. So what I do is bespoke workflow. So I can go into a company, I can work with the boss, and I can actually make him redundant, because everything that he does, we can capture in a process. That means he can now sell his business and walk away.
Absolutely not, or he can scale it, right? I mean, at the end of the day, there's a a saying that I have that if you want to know how to scale, the synonym for scaling should be repeatable, right? So if you don't have repeatable processes, you cannot scale your business.
No, absolutely. But,
and if you want to know the synonym for profit, it's scalability, right?
Well,
So all those things, they line right in.
Well, if the guy wants to retire, I mean, the other thing I say to him is that, look, I can make this business run so smoothly, you can even let your son run it. I mean, maybe it's just me, but I wouldn't let my son anywhere near a business. But that's just me. Now, yes. I'll give you some. I would
definitely let my son do demolishing work. he can destroy just about anything. So.
Right. I'll give you some more examples. Now, you'll have to help me with the language here. Do you have something called portable appliance testing in America? Whenever there's a piece of electrical equipment in an office, it has to have a little green label on to say it's safe to use.
Yeah, in the United States, it's called the UL code. So we go to Universal Laboratories, I think is the company, right. And then they verify it and they give it a UL code, and then you can use that without a permit anywhere in the country.
Right. Well, it's a little bit more in the UK. You can have small organisations, and I've got a client who he manages 10 subcontract engineers. He gets business in from the internet inquiry saying, "Can you test this piece of equipment or pieces of equipment?" And he books a subcontract engineer to go visit the site, do the testing, and everything associated with it. He gets the payments, then he issues the licenses. That's fine. But he's spending 15 hours a day managing 10 engineers. And when I looked into what he was doing, he uses various pieces of software like QuickBooks to do his accountancy and linking to something called iTrade, which does the bookings of the actual visits. But everything else was taking him 15 hours a day to manage 10 people. And we sat him down and we captured his process. And basically it was managing the different stages of job. He might have 40 or 50 jobs on the go, and he was running around in circles trying to capture all that information. Well, now his PA can do the same work in 4 hours. And she has on our system effectively 2 screens. A screen of the jobs that are in flight, and then you open a job, and then it's got 8 stages to go through where certain information has to be ready at each stage. And that runs on a PC, on a tablet, or on a mobile phone. And she can do in 4 hours what took him 15 hours simply because he wasn't organized. And what's, I suppose, unique about what we do is that we can capture any process and produce a custom system specifically for that company. So he had a particular way of working. Once we captured that, then his PA then was at the same level of knowledge that he was, and the business could scale.
Absolutely. Now, I think it's also important for managers to understand how they explain this to their staff and their Johnny that has all of this intellectual property that he holds for the company that he doesn't want to share. Because whenever you're going to start talking to that person, he's going to be reluctant to hand over the keys to the stuff that he thinks he created. How do you convince the manager that Johnny will comply and get on board?
Well, there's a couple of points there. The first thing is that workflow automation, as I mentioned before, is where you take somebody's job role and essentially replace it with a computer. What I do is process digitalization. Say, for example, the case of my patch testing company. At any one time, there might be 20 jobs in flight. And you see this list of jobs that can do. And the PA will look at this and she will select one and work on that one. And her boss might say to her, well, look, how many jobs have you got to do? And she can show him a list of 10 jobs. And he said, and she said, each job takes me an hour. And the guy says at 10 o'clock, well, I want all 10 jobs done by 4 o'clock tonight. In the nicest possible way, she can push back and say, well, actually, how long does each job take? Oh, it takes an hour. We know this because it always takes an hour. And there's 10 of them, and I've got 6 hours. Which of the 6 do you want me to do? So you in actual some ways, it's empowering the user at each stage to push back and say, look, we know how long this takes, and the system's in real time, it logs everything, and you can prove that it takes an hour to do the job. It gives you a tool to gently push back to the manager if they're being unreasonable.
Absolutely. So now I'm going to throw a big curveball at you here because I've got a lot of experience in this particular set of issues. How do you handle the employee that is doing highly subjective work, that the time frames on troubleshooting and stuff have pretty big needles, right? I know that I'm going to use a really technical update. I'm going to use a Yum update or an apt-get update, right? Some computers, that process takes 5 minutes, and some computers, that process might take 2 or 3 hours. How do you convince the IT person that thinks that being a system administrator or a DBA is some kind of magic, that we can actually put processes around it and put open loops and closing loops to make sure that this can happen? How do you convince that employee that what he's doing isn't magic, that we can create this process?
My experience, ultimately, you'll only convince those people when they use the system. I have found this on many occasions, when the most skeptical of people are usually the people, once we've got a system in there running a workflow, and by a workflow, I mean any process where you have a sequence of steps from beginning to end. That's my definition of workflow. Once one is in, and people actually see it working, they then say, oh, why can't it do this? Why can't it do that? And it's been my experience, the most skeptical of people come back and say, actually, now I can see what you're at. We could actually do this, we could do this, and we can do this. And we've found that it's actually the guys in the shop floor who actually have done the job in the past usually have the best ideas. And by capturing the processes and then implementing that process, they feel that they're actually contributing to the job.
Right. I believe that there's two kinds of work in this world. I think there's planned work and unplanned work. And the more planned work that you can do, the more profitable your business is going to be. Obviously, you're always going to have the case scenario where left balls come at you and you're going to have to break process to go after that. I think a lot of this is when you're creating processes, you're creating standards for your business to run under. And I think that word standard is really, really important to understand, because sometimes the process won't always work. So how do you recommend somebody to open up a loop or a feedback loop into the process that says, hey, I did this process and this time I caught some variable that didn't follow the normal pattern?
Look, the case in point, when I talked to the pack testing guy, when I first captured his process, he said, oh, well, we get an inquiry on the internet and then we send out a quotation and then we process the quotation straight away. At which point my change agent said, wait a minute, what happens if the quotation's not accepted? Oh, well, we re-quote or we don't go ahead. I said, okay, so your process now has a rework loop where you go back and redo a quotation, or you have an exit loop which says job is lost. And I come back to the point, if you do something regularly, it's the process. If you're doing it, if it's different every time, either you're in a job shop, which is a chaos for losing money, or you haven't captured the process.
Right. And sometimes you'll find that you have to modify that process as you go along, right? Because you're going to add new feedback loops potentially as you come across new variables or changing variables in that process.
Well, that's one of the strengths of my product, is because everything is documented and captured. If you know when you deviate from the process, because obviously the process won't let you do it, but because it's custom for every company, then we can actually put in exactly what they would do under those circumstances. And if they have and the nice thing is that if sometimes the point comes, well, you have to call Bert to do that particular role, then you actually find out what Bert actually does. Because Bert doesn't, he'll do something. He might not tell people what he does, but he does something to make it work. Now, if you capture that, when Bert's off sick, you've got a way of working through that. So you can actually take the stress out of managing a business by not being so reliant on everyone being there. And it has an also additional advantage that when new people come on board, you don't give them a spreadsheet and say, this is what we use. You've got a process which feeds them through step by step by step. Can I throw a curveball at you?
Absolutely.
How much do you know about milking cows?
How much do I know about milking? Very little.
Right. I didn't know very much about milking cows either. You plug them in, you get the milk out, and you put it in what's called a holding tank. Now, I've got I'm working with a farmer. He has a £250,000 milking machine run by 3 separate people. And the point is, once you've milked the cows, you then have to send milk off for testing. You have to clean the machine in a particular way. And the problem is that the testing results for the milk that you've sent off doesn't come back in the same shift as the person who actually sent it off. And if you don't do things absolutely correctly, the milk in the holding tank just has to be emptied away down the drain and wasted. And this farmer was controlling the whole of his system with an Excel spreadsheet. And if one of the guys didn't fill in the Excel spreadsheet cell when he did a job, the farmer then has to find out, did he do it or didn't he do it? And worse than that, because the business is running 24 hours a day, he'd have to find that person who might be down the pub or might be out shopping with his wife to ask him, did you do X, Y, Z? And at that point, if he can't get an answer within a reasonable time frame, then the compliance and health and safety has been broken and that milk has to be dumped. So what we're doing is we're replacing it with a workflow, which means that the person logs on at his workstation, his PC, and he goes through certain things and it can't sign off his job at the end of his shift unless everything has been completed. And better than that, because it's available on the cloud, the farmer can look at his mobile phone and knows exactly where everything is happening all the time.
That is beautiful. Yeah. That's the chain of custodies is really hard to track sometimes. And that's what you have to track chain of custody on who was there at what shift and what they did to make sure that they did all their proper jobs. Chain of custody and governance are wildly important when you're dealing with governance. So you're talking about even a small dairy farm has to deal with those compliancy issues, correct?
Absolutely, and it's not even. So there we were. The first example I gave you with the pack testing, well, that's a task-related job. With the milkman, the milking system, that's a compliance and health and safety point of view. But it goes further than that. There's also the information. I mean, I've got another client. This is in the early stages yet. They're a business. They're builders. They have 16 sites building up and down the UK. And each site has somebody in charge, they call a site engineer, which has total responsibility for everything that goes in the site, the materials, the labor, the task, what is done, what the priorities are. And the company runs from Birmingham by ringing up from, I think it's 7:30 in the morning until 10:30 in the morning, rings each site with the management team, asking the site engineer what the issues are, what they're going to need tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera. Then between 10:30 and 2:30, they are making their decisions about what the priorities are for the following day. And between 2:30 and the end of the day, they're ringing back, giving instructions to the site engineer. So what we're doing with our change agent, he's going in there, he's capturing all the information that the site engineer has to report on. And it's in a form like you have with Amazon. It's as you answer some questions, more questions come up. So although we know between us that it's a massive form with a lot of detail, when you use it, you just get spoon-fed your way through. Now, the beauty about this is when he's filled that information, he hits the submit button, and that information, when the system's up and running, will be immediately available in the head office in their database to do any further processing they want to do. And completely revolutionize their way that they're doing. And all we're doing is providing a workflow that captures information and feeds it out in a logical order.
Right. So I've been in business for a long time, and one thing that I've realized in business is that you lose the most amount of money in your bottlenecks, and you can't really define where your bottlenecks are unless you have a really clean process, right? So there's a lot of companies that have work sitting, waiting to be done, and they don't know what they need to hire for to get the work done. It's really, really upsetting, right? And if they could just get even minimal processes in place for some of their jobs, would help them tremendous amounts.
I mean, I'm also on the warpath to get rid of email, because the problem with email is that it can happen at the same time. Two people can send a message to each other at the same time with differing instructions.
Yes.
People can get omitted from the email, and what we can do is, because everything is attached to the workflow at that particular time, all the information that's relevant, whoever goes in to do that job, and it doesn't have to be the same person every time, but they can be spoon-fed through what they have to do, what information they have, what do they need. And if they don't have that information ready, if you've got the process captured properly, they can't progress.
Right. It's funny, David, because I'm currently working on an email for your proper process to manage your inbox. And I've written some tools to say, how many emails are unread in your inbox and how many are in your inbox for my staff. So, and really just knowing how to manage your inbox. I've got so many employees that have 10 or 20,000 emails in their inbox and I didn't even know it. And there's no way that they're managing that inbox properly if that's the way it is. So I applaud your desire to get rid of email completely. I think there's probably some better tools out there.
I've got companies out there who are running their processes, who communicate very effectively because it's all attached to the process and the job in hand. And the nice thing is, when you want to comment on something, I mean, we did a system for what we called an onboarding system. So everything from the interview handling through to the guy joining the company or the girl joining the company, and they need a computer and a desk, all that sort of thing. The whole process was captured. And at each stage, when the information was moved on to the next person to take action, all the information that they needed to know was attached to that job. Now, some of it, being confidential information, couldn't be viewed by some people. But as all the fields in the information is down as a security level down to a field level, it only displays what you're allowed to see. So the whole system was completely secure, but also meant that people couldn't progress to do the next bit until all the information was there. So no need for emails at all. Right,
and that particular piece where only the person could see it at the right time, that's really important when you're dealing with HIPAA data as well. Right, it's a wildly important function in HIPAA, is that you can only see the amount of data that you need to do your job at the time, right? You don't even need to see the data that you're going to need in 2 hours from now. If you need it right now, I get it right now. So that's a really good piece of the puzzle that you've got put together there already.
So going back to where I'm really focused, in the UK there are 5.2 million what we call small medium-sized enterprises under 300 employees. And that we're trying to introduce to get them to understand that they need processes, and that processes why don't they use them now? We've talked about this briefly. A lot of it is they don't know what they don't know. They are too busy. I'm looking for companies which I call chaos companies, where everyone's running around doing stuff, but it's out of control. And what we can do is, by working with our change agents, and a change agent is somebody experienced in working and capturing process maps, can capture the information. It takes the stress out of the company by the change agent capturing the process, and then having captured the process, they send it to me, and then we implement it relatively quickly through our automatic tools. So it's 2 stages.
Fantastic. I think the audience has a pretty good idea of your passion for process. And for me, it's really, the processes are very, very important, but governing the fact that things actually get done is really, really important. And having an employee that verbally says done is wildly different than having an employee that checks off a box that said this was completed, right? Because you can be, in the hallway or, at the happy hour, wherever you're at, and you're just kind of talking casually, you can say things that, may have seemed true at the time, but maybe has a little bit of false information there. But when you're literally writing it down at each step, it becomes less likely for breakage and rework, right? The most expensive work you'll ever do in your whole life is rework. Work that you've already been paid to do, and you're doing it again because it got screwed up the first time.
Right. Absolutely. That's the history. I won't go into details, but that's how we devised the tool to solve that sort of problem.
Yes.
Because it was a case of using the SAP tool. If you're familiar with SAP, you have to, and I realize SAP is not the tool for small businesses.
Correct.
But $1.5 million system perhaps, but you have to control it by 6-letter mnemonics. And if the guy on the shop floor doesn't know the right mnemonics, he doesn't put the information in, and you don't discover that until you get the end of the process, that this $500,000 box has got to be shipped to a particular place, but somebody forgot to put the address, the shipping address, in SAP 2 days ago.
Right.
So what we did is we devised a system that stepped it through, and that was the genesis of the system, where the right information, he couldn't progress to do what he wanted to do on SAP until he had answered these questions. When he answered those questions, hit a button, and what we did is just sent the information into SAP. And what we can do this we can use this tool as what I call a wrapper. So even if you've got established software tools in place, all the bits that are not covered by the software tools, rather than having to change your working practice to match the tools that you've got, put in the process by capturing it in our system, and then that'll put everything around, we call it a wrapper, the bits that don't get done. As I mentioned earlier, my pat testing guy was driving himself spare 15 hours a day trying to remember stuff, which he now has no need to remember because it's all in the system.
Yeah, I also have this case scenario. I've had it probably 3 times today, and today was a stressful day for me anyway, where the process is there and people are people and they just go around that process, right? Now, when they come to me, I'm very cautious and say, hey, we have a process for that. Can you make sure to go back there? And setting the culture in the company, understanding that is very, very important, but it is challenging, right? So do you have any tips or tricks on how do you tell a business owner, so you sold the business owner, he's all on board, he gets it, he's ready to move forward, but we had to change the company and the culture, right? Or the culture in the company that, hey, we use process and all those things. Do you have any tips or tricks for the owner of the company or the managers to really get everybody else in the mindset?
This is where we differ from a lot of companies that offer you a solution. We work with our change agents. Our change agents are people who have those softer skills. I talked about, they sit down with the guys and talk through how the process works. And as I mentioned, the first person says we do this, the next person says we do this, third person says we do this, fourth person says no, we don't do that. They then step in either as the dictator, or a little bit softer as a negotiator to reach agreement. But the important thing there, the people that are designing the process are actually the people that will be using the process. So it's almost a bottom up. So it's instead of the management coming and say, you are now going to use a $1.5 million SAP tool, or you're now going to use a $300,000 Microsoft tool, get on with it. They have captured how they actually do the job. Now, again, by using a change agent, those people won't put in a bad process. I mean, if you automate a bad process, you just get bad results faster. So what our change agents do is not only will they help capture the process, but they will handle the softer skills of life and say, when you said that, do you really mean that? Why? Well, if you actually mean that, won't this happen? Oh yeah, well that's always happening. Light bulb moment, maybe you've got a process problem there that you need to change. And the beautiful thing about this, my tools, is that it's not fixed in stone. So to recap slightly, then if the process doesn't do what you want it to do, then you can change it. But obviously, because you've got the document that says this is what the process is and this is how it's implemented it, you can always, hopefully improve on it.
Yes.
But by using change agents, we've got people in there who are actually working with the people who actually do the job.
Right. Empowering the people that are doing the work, I think, is wildly important in any process that you do. So I've got one last question for you, I think. I might have a couple more. So, and I know my answer, but I'm going to ask you, do you recommend on the project level that businesses have a process for onboarding and approving projects?
Well, that's an interesting one, because that's a role I've had in the past. In terms of doing this, if it's a process that you do, if it's the same process every time, then it becomes a process. If every time it's done differently, then each project is different. And again, talking about smaller companies, and my company I was working with was 1.2 billion turnover. They did have a methodology and gating where processes were approved and they had to go through. We did have a fairly formalized process, which did make things smoother, because it meant that before management would ever evaluate a project, all the documents were there to review.
Right.
But
I had to put one in place, right? So because I'm an entrepreneurial spirit and I have all these what I think are great ideas at really fast speeds, I had the problem for years of putting too many projects on my team's plate at one time, right? So we had to create a process that allowed me to place my projects in a queue things that I wanted to work on, but also not overburden my staff at the same time. So we have a backlog of projects that we want to have done, but there's a process that we have in place that says, okay, we're going to take this job, this project out of the hopper and bring it up to the top of the line. And this is our new priority project that we're going to be working on. And it was a huge change for the entire company, because before that, we would do a whole bunch of projects and we would get, 20% or 80% of a project done, but never finish it because a new project would come in and I got a new shiny toy that I want to play with, right? So it was constantly bucking that system. So even a process for how you approve projects to be done, I think is wildly important.
I don't disagree. And the problem is then, of course, all the resources get sucked onto the project that's behind, and it may not be the best process to have all the resources. But that was another life.
Right. But at that point, you still have to make simple processes or people don't follow them, right? If you put too many hurdles in your processes, humans are going to figure out how to get around that process or buck that system.
Yeah, but I go right back to the example of the pack testing. The PA knows exactly how many jobs she can cope with a day, and she can push back on her boss in the nicest possible way by make a decision. Now, instead of him trying to juggle for 15 hours, trying to juggle the jobs, he would have to make a decision. It's this one, this one, this one, this one, and it's not that one, it's not that one, it's not that one. So it's not magic, but suddenly he could see, as they say in English, the wood from the trees.
Right. And I promise every business owner in the world, 6 finished jobs is way more profitable than 10 almost finished jobs.
Yeah.
Like every day of the week. You can have 100 almost finished jobs, none of them are going to pay you, but 6 done jobs, paid, right? That's how you get paid, is you complete the job. You have to get there somehow. Yeah. All right, David, one last question for you before we go. In the past year, what's the biggest accomplishment you and your team have done for a small business or for your business?
I think I go, it's difficult. I would think that, I think it was the fact that the guy doing the pack test company, I would say he literally was working 15 hours a day, just trying to keep himself afloat. And he was just so stressed. And I knew that was a problem, because when we tried to work with him initially, to get him to sit down for more than 2 hours to actually talk about what he did was difficult. And so it took a long time to capture that information. But the smile on his face when it went live was reward enough. That was super.
So he went from 15 hours a day working in his business. Now a VA does all that work. A virtual assistant does all that work. Did you say 4 hours? 4
hours. And the last time I spoke to him, he was talking about taking on another 5 engineers.
Right. So now he can really grow his business.
It probably means that his PA is going to have to work 6 hours a day, but you see where I'm coming from.
Well, the beautiful thing about that is now you're not limited to one VA, because he can replicate that job multiple times, right? You can have 10 VAs doing that job because the process is already documented. You cannot scale if you don't have a process.
That's an interesting point, because the original brief when we first talked with him, he wanted to take on an assistant that could do the same job as he did. And it was when I said to him, well, you've got to tell us what job you do. And that's how we started capturing it. And he hasn't hired another high-level employee, because his PA can do the role.
Absolutely.
But it was just a matter of getting it down on paper. And I as an individual company, we could do 12 jobs a year, were it not for the fact that we have our change agents. Our change agents now mean that we are not limited by the number of jobs that we can capture, because we've got a network of change agents in place.
Fantastic. David, do you have an offer that you would like to share the audience? If somebody wanted to do business with you, how would they do that?
Well, because of this very kind invitation to come on your podcast, what we've said is we've just launched our price list in the UK. It's in pounds. It's in www.intelligentactions.co.uk. And there's a pricing page in there. And we will offer anybody who contacts us directly and mentions the Clicks and Bricks 20 discount code that you see there, we will basically knock 20% off the price.
Fantastic.
And that offer will be in place until the end of March 2022.
Fantastic. And I'm making an assumption because you're marketing this to companies under 300 employees that your price is already an affordable price, right? You're not enterprise level software costs. Is that a fair assumption?
If you came to us with a process already captured, we could have a system up and running for you for $1,500 a year.
Oh, well, that's very reasonable, especially if you're going to save 10 hours a day of a president's or a CEO's time.
Absolutely. When I get big enough, I'll put my prices up. But at the moment, that's what we're happy to do. The main cost, and I'll be very straight through with people, is the capturing the process. That's where the cost is. You know, if you bring a consultant in, it costs you $600 or $800 a day, then that's where the cost will be. But if you can capture the process and send it through to us, we can work with you directly.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today, David. Is there anything you would like to leave the audience with before we go?
Sometimes people ask me, do you have a life ambition? Well, I do have one. My first name is Arga. I don't know if you've come across the name, Argur.
I have not come across that name before.
No, it's Scandinavian for grumpy.
Okay.
So I'm on a mission to get the metro centres, either the US or the UK, to name the first storm of the year Arga, because it's grumpy. So, my life ambition is to get so when you see it that you get Storm Arga in Great Britain, you know who's caused it. You know, that's where I'm at.
Fantastic.
So
I
anyway,
think we
you
have.
guys out there.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Keep going.
I say you guys out there can write to your Met Office and say we want Storm Arga because it's grumpy. Then please do.
That's it for today's show. Again, thank you for watching. If you'd like to join my text line community, 314-370-2871. I'll never try to sell you anything on that line. I will send you one, maybe two tips and tricks on business or technology anytime throughout the month. To join that text line community, all you have to do is ask me any question about business or technology, and I'll give you a totally unbiased, absolutely free answer. Thanks a lot for today, folks, and get to work.